with this show that we call From Curious to Learners. For we know that the curious become the learners, and the learners become our leaders. Now, over the past 15 weeks, we've been talking to leaders in various sectors about their journey of how they became who they are, how they became that doctor, how they became that lawyer, that CEO, that CISO, or whomever. But we're going to shift gears just a little bit today because I want to focus more on the curious to learners part of it, and I want to start to educate the learners on some things. And today we're starting a series that I call Curious About Coding. And today we have a rock star. We have as our guest today a true rock star. Look at that smile. Look at that smile, folks. That's a face made for podcasting, right? So we have none other than Kelsey Hightower as our guest today. Now, I don't want to butcher Kelsey's bio and his resume, his background, and also I'll let Kelsey do that. But I want to share a personal story before we even get into all of this. And some of you who are listening to this may know that Kelsey works for this little small tiny company. I mean, it's a little tiny company. It's starting to make a few waves in the industry called Google, and I happen to work for that same company. But the tie-in is that a year and a half ago, actually is closer to 2 years ago, when I began to start interviewing for my role at Google. I'm an AWS guy. I don't know anything about Google platforms, Google systems, and I definitely did not know anything about this thing called Kubernetes. And so I started looking at videos on YouTube, and I saw this bald-headed cat, and his head was kind of bald and shaven, kind of like the way I used to rock mine. But the dude was just the dopest cat I had ever heard. And the way he broke stuff down, with the simplicity that he broke it down so that it would forever be broke. And so I watched everything that I could find about this cat named Kelsey Hightower. Fast forward, my interview process, I learned so much from this cat, Google ended up hiring me too. So Kelsey, I want to tell you, I know I told you in Memphis when we were there at one of our customer events, but thank you, brother. Thank you for everything that you did, and thank you for helping me to upskill enough to get my job at Google. Everybody, welcome Kelsey Hightower to the show.
Yo, wow, I think you competing for the best intro ever. We might just have to end the show right there, right? I don't want to let nobody down. It's hard to come back from that.
Man, listen. I'm serious, man, because you know, without divulging too much about what our process is and how we actually go about recruiting the best of the best talent, but it's not easy to say the least to land a job at Google. And so you really have to know some stuff, and just watching you and learning from you and listening to the way you presented your material, it was very, very instrumental in helping me in my preparation process for my job at Google. And I've seen you do that so many times before. So if you wouldn't mind, Kelsey, would you take just a few moments to introduce yourself to our listeners, whom I affectionately refer to as our learners? Tell them a little bit about Kelsey Hightower.
I guess I consider myself a minimalist first and foremost. So, this is someone who kind of tries to live that simple life, stay focused on the things that matter. And I also consider myself who's not afraid to learn in public. So as I'm learning things, I've gotten comfortable with sharing as I'm learning, right? So I tend not to wait till I'm an expert. And, when we look at my background, I kind of grew up wanting to play sports. I got my first job at McDonald's out there in Atlanta, actually in Jonesboro, Georgia. And that's where I think a lot of my maturity began. A lot of people kind of look down on like fast food but I learned a lot of responsibility at the age of 15. I was a shift manager, so that means I had all the keys. And I remember the responsibility of running that store, making sure that the drive-through kept moving, counting down all the registers. And then understanding that, the responsibility you have to keep the ship running and the trust required to maintain that at such an age, it kind of prepared me to, put my best work forward, make sure that when you're mopping, it has that glow at the end. And
Yeah, yeah.
that work ethic stayed with me. And then I think later on, I didn't write my first program, I would say, in earnest until my 20s. So a lot of people think you got to start early. I'm pretty sure that helps. I don't have a college degree. And my background really is just a person who really wanted to get into this kind of career, this tech career, and self-taught is kind of my foundation, and that holds true today.
Wow, wow, that's very, very impressive, and that really dovetails nicely, Kelsey, into the topic that we have set up for our learners today. Today, I want to talk about I want to talk about how coding and developing can actually really be considered as being cool. When I actually was exposed to this stuff, way back in the way back time machine, there the vernacular was even different. What you do day to day was there was not even a name. The current name for it didn't exist back in the 80s when I served in the United States Marine Corps. My very first coding language was a language called Ada-based Natural, where we actually wrote programs to access data from the Marine Corps database, the Central Marine Corps data mainframe. And so we were referred to as programmers. The term programmers has kind of given way to this cool and hip new concept called coders and developers. And so I want to talk to our learners today about how coding can really be cool, because you're one of the coolest cats that I've seen ever do it. I've seen you on stage in front of thousands. I've seen you do your thing, man. And that's about some of the dopest stuff I've ever seen. So as we get ready to get into tee up in that topic, we're going to talk about how Kelsey became Kelsey. We want to delve a little bit into your background in coding. You wrote your first program in your 20s, but we're going to unpack that a little bit. But before we do that, I mean, the people want to know. The people want to know some things. They want to know now. I mean, somebody's listening. They want to know, Kelsey, Mac or Windows?
So it's Mac all day. And the reason why it's Mac for me, I'm actually on a Chromebook right now. So to me, I need a native Unix environment, right? I learn and cut my teeth on the command line. So I need access to all the open source software. I still write programs on the daily, and I can't have anything getting in the way. Now, Windows is getting better, to the credit,
Yeah.
Microsoft team is digging in, but that was not the very natural thing for Windows 20 years ago, right? It's like you had the command prompt, and y'all really couldn't even SSH back then. So, y'all could play video games. Y'all could play
Yeah,
video
yeah.
games. But when it came to like writing software and languages outside of like the .NET stack, having a Linux box. So when Mac came out, OS 10 is really when I got heavily into Mac. I probably used OS 9 towards the end. But then when OS 10 came out, it was this perfect unity between Unix. You had a real certified Unix environment, a command shell, SSH, Vim, all the things that made a Linux person feel natural. But then you had this nice UI, right? The whole Mac experience combined with those two. And I
Uh-huh.
kind of never looked back, right? That was like the perfect Unix laptop for me.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So that was a very
And
good
before
explanation.
I
Now,
forget, before we get now, you talked about like why software is being cool, and I just want to pull on that thread before I forget, because when people say why is software considered being cool, maybe cool is not the best word, but I think it's cool because we've expanded the number of people who are now writing software, and maybe that brought in some of the cool kids, people who typically
yeah.
would have done something different. And when I think about writing software, it's just another tool. If you want to build a house, you're going to have to learn how to use a hammer, some nails, etc. But in the software business, in the software world, just like an artist, when you have something in your mind, you have an idea. If you're an artist, you pick up the paintbrush. If you're a musician, you pick up the microphone. Well, in the software business, if I want to build some software or a video game or automate how my lights come on in my house, then the tool of choice for us is writing software. And a lot of us have cool ideas, and it's really about being able to take whatever you can think of, now that we kind of live in a digital society, access to that digital society, the language we speak in that digital society, is where the programming comes in. And this is why I think it becomes this thing is If you want to see your ideas come to life on this digital canvas, then you have to learn how to program to take advantage of it. So that's why I think you're starting to see, quote unquote, all of these cool people or cool ideas coming to life, because we've opened up, we expanded that user base of developers who can write this stuff because of self-taught people who write books, the boot camps, the code academies, all of those things.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And you said something earlier that really resonated with me. You said that you're self-taught, you still work at this every single day. You're writing code every single day. But you also said you kind of buried the lead that is top of mind for most people, that has been for most a barrier to entry into the space, which is, I don't have a college degree. But because we're living in a gig economy now, this is a gig economy. This is a place where learning is available if you have the right motivation and the right initiative to do so. If you have enough skills, somebody's going to hire you. Somebody's going to take a shot at you. Somebody's going to give you a shot if you are good enough. And in yesteryear, when you think about the programmer of yesteryear, the image is, I think of IBM, white shirt, skinny tie, maybe a pocket square with pins in your pocket. Those were your programmers with some horn-rimmed glasses back in the day. Those were the cats who were your programmers back in the day. But the cats now, because a college degree is not a limiting factor for you to be able to write cool code and have these cool ideas and to develop this cool stuff, a college degree is no longer the main barrier of entry into this space. And I just wanted to interject that.
Well, some people would probably say in some ways it never was when you think about it, because a lot of the stuff that you see in most college curriculums. So I guess one thing to kind of get correct is computer science is not necessarily going to teach you how to program. And I think that's where the big industry disconnect is. Now, there's a lot of value in any education, in my opinion. So when you go to school for computer science and maybe the curriculum you take, you get to touch some code, write some C, learn how computers work, study algorithms, that might fast track your learning, because a lot of times those curriculums have a lot of things that you wouldn't otherwise look into, right? So having this kind of curated set of content to really bootstrap you, especially when you're coming out of high school, maybe you're not quite sure what you want to do. But even before that, there were people writing software before we had maybe official computer science degrees. So this whole profession is a little bit faster than what colleges can keep up with. So if you look at some of the stuff that we do day in, day out, things that you see in Google Cloud, a lot of this stuff doesn't find its way into a college curriculum on any level, right? Maybe some of the theory stuff, but a lot of it is in like the open source, the place where we write and collaborate on software as a community. We're moving at the pace of every day. And I think a lot of times colleges have to build a curriculum on things that are going to be around for a while, things that are pretty much well understood, that can be studied, that can be examined and be tested for. So there's no knock against either path, but this tech game is moving so fast that someone with a 4-year degree might actually come out behind. So this is why I think even the people in college, if you're watching this or listening to this, you got to make sure you supplement your skills. This is why we have internships. But even before getting an internship, take on a side project. Build something on your own just to get your skills up and learn how to actually use some of the tools of the trade.
Man, you hit the nail on the head. So my oldest son is now following in my footsteps, and he's starting to go down the path of being a cloud architect, and he wants to be a cloud security architect, because this is what he's seen Pop do. He's seen me do this over the years, and I guess I kind of put some cool on it because I fancy myself a cool guy. I mean, look how I'm wearing this hat. Not everybody can do this. I mean, this just don't come natural, Kelsey. Everybody can't do this. Everybody can't pull off this whole swag. So my oldest son, I remember when they were kids, they were fascinated with sports. They didn't want anything to do. They didn't care about what I did. I mean, they came to my job back in the day when I worked at Cox Enterprises. They came to my office and they liked the fact that oh wow, Pop has a really works in a nice building. He has a nice office, and this is kind of cool. And there's a really dope cafeteria downstairs that make great burgers. So that was the extent of what they wanted to do, get him understand about what I did day to day. But as my oldest son grew up and learned more and watched more and observed more, he told me, Pop, I want to do what you do. Tell me what it is that you do. And so as he was in college and he's still finishing up his degree right now, I started him on the certification track, working with side projects, working with me on side projects, and understanding and developing some real skills. My middle son, who's just completed his master's degree, I started him down the same track because when he got his bachelor's, he still couldn't find a job, Kelsey. He had a 4-year degree, but no skills. So I got him certified Scrum Master, his ITIL foundations, and now he works for a great company doing great things, and he just got his MBA. But you have to have those skills. You have to have the skills to do something. And that's where that experience part of exposure, experience, and expectation comes in. And that is where mentors are needed. I think what's going to happen is somebody is going to listen to this podcast or watch this podcast and see Kelsey and hear Kelsey's story and realize I can do this too. I don't like school like that, but I do like to tinker. I am insanely curious about a lot of stuff. How do I channel and harness this curiosity to benefit me? So keeping the thread going with our this or that. So when we talk about languages, what do you prefer now, Go or Python?
Oh man, the whole programming languages thing. This is where I think a lot of people get caught up. It's like, do I prefer English or Spanish, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with either of those languages. I have to use the one that is most useful to me at the moment. So I live in the United States of America. English is what we speak. And for the most part, that gets me very far, right, in my work and in my day-to-day life. So when it comes to programming, I do prefer a programming language called Go, G-O. Some people think it's short for Google, but it's a standalone programming language. But the reason why I prefer it these days is because most of the tools I work with are also written in the Go programming language. So if I need to go build something or extend an existing system, it really helps to be able to do it in the programming language that is written in. But you got to remember, in my career, I spent years in the Python community, giving talks, meetups. I've even contributed code to some of the Python libraries. I had a few Python libraries myself. I did that for a number of years. And then I moved on to Ruby. And I moved on to Ruby when I got a job at a company called Puppet Labs. So it's a configuration management tool people use to manage infrastructure. And again, the language of choice was Ruby. So I switched programming languages so that I can contribute to that particular software. So I think when people look at languages, don't get paralyzed in trying to learn the best one. There's going to be one that sticks with you for whatever reason. You don't have to justify it with anyone. But once you get that one language, a lot of people don't realize that if you go as deep as you can in that one language, when it comes time to switch to another language, there'll be things that carry you over, like variables and classes and methods and compiling and writing tests. Those fundamentals will transfer, right? The syntax may be different going from, Python to Go, but the fundamentals are roughly the same. So my advice to people, pick one, go deep as you can, but think of them as tools, right? You're not a Python developer. You're a developer that happens to be able to use Python.
Wow, that is that's deep. That's really, really cool. I saw you write it. You put a tweet out the other day that said that the programming language, the best programming language is the one. I want to quote you correctly, but I'll paraphrase. The best programming language is the one that you know best, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think so it's like the best programming language is the one you know how to use. And
Right.
so if someone told you that, look, in order to get out of this burning building, you have to write a program to do it, you're going to probably pick the one that you know. Even if another programming language is better in general, better for whatever technical reasons, that's great. But the one that you have, it's like similar to the phrase of the best camera is the one you have with you. right? So it's like, hey, I left
Hmm.
my best camera at home. Well, that's no longer your best camera in this particular situation.
Yeah, I left my Hasselblad at home, or left my red or my Hasselblad or my Leica at home. But that Panasonic that you have with you, you rock with that joint, because that's going to be the best camera, because that's going to be the one that captures that image. That's a very, very salient point.
Let me add a little context to that too. So a lot of people think that means only learn one language and use it for everything. If you want that statement to be true, then if you learn another language and you learn how to use it, for example, if you're doing web development, you're going to learn probably JavaScript. If you're doing mobile development, like for Android, you're going to learn Java or Kotlin. The more languages you learn, or at least get some exposure to, and you take the time to go a little bit deeper on, you may find that the situation will make that statement true in a different context, right? For mobile development, I know how to use Kotlin, so that might be the best tool for the job. So it's not a learn one and then try to use it everywhere. And that can actually get you pretty far, even though people look down on that. But you want to make sure that you're not selling yourself short by not understanding that there's additional tools out there, right? If you're going to learn how to build a house, you're not going to try to do the whole thing with a hammer. There's going to be a point in time where you're going to need a wrench. You're going to need something else to complete the job. Trying to build a whole house with a hammer, I bet you can do it. I bet someone has, but I don't think that's the most efficient thing you can do.
Listen, I watch a lot of nature shows, right? I watch a lot of this Alaska, the Great Outdoors, and the wilderness shows, and I've seen people build cabins with just a hammer. I mean, with just an axe. So, a fair point. You got to have the right tool for the job. Years at the beginning of my career, after the Marine Corps, I was a field support engineer, and I was out doing break fix on computers. And it was important that you had a toolbox, that you had whenever you went on a service call, you had a tool that you could reach in your bag and grab that could do what you needed to get done. If I have to completely break the desktop apart and pull out and replace the motherboard, I better have more than just a screwdriver. I better have a screwdriver, and I better have some needle nose pliers. I better have all of these tools. You got to have the right tool for the job. So that's kind of what I'm hearing you say when it comes to coding. You're going to need to understand the language for the application that you're developing, or whatever you are actually building. Because I'm hearing that phrase from you a lot. You're building software. You're building something. And I think that speaks to the evolution of programming as a profession. Programmers used to actually write programs that were pretty static, and they did a thing. And programmers became software developers. Programmers, they programmed in languages like COBOL and Fortran and Ada and all of those mainframe languages that could interface with a mainframe. They gave way to software developers who began to develop these things using object-oriented languages, and those were software developers. And now you guys are even cooler. Now you guys are just coders, and that just sounds all kind of cool to me. So talk a little bit about it, that if you will, and from where you sit as a coder, as a software developer, as someone who builds software, how do you see this transition going back as far as when you got involved in this process?
I'm gonna be honest. I don't know if there's actually a transition. I think there's all of these things at the same time. So there's a difference between like really becoming a professional, right? Like to be a pro athlete, anyone can go to the basketball court and shoot around, right? Like you can even
Mm-hmm.
shoot around on a regulation court. Does that mean you're a pro athlete? Probably not, right? So there's a couple of requirements sometimes to be a pro athlete, like getting paid for what you do. And then there's a bit of training that goes into being a pro athlete. And I think a lot of times when you start thinking about the professional career, software engineer, software developer, you're writing tests, you have a set of responsibilities. These things have to run into production. You have time schedules and commitments. Sometimes it's also going to be legal things that you have to include inside of that software, right? So maybe your software is taking credit card payments. You're going to have to learn a lot about the payment industry and some of the security principles behind it. So you start to get into that when you get into that professional realm. And that's where you start to, in their mind, you start to think of that certain tie. Maybe it was something that only business people used to do that made the transition to software back then. But now I think we've opened up the number of people who can do that, build against business requirements. So you still have that professional software. But now when you start to think about coding, my daughter, she plays a game called Roblox, right? It's kind of like Minecraft, but you can customize it and build your own mini games within the game. And that game exposes Lua. Now, in this particular case, my daughter just wants to build, some new element in the game. So she's going to code, whatever it is based on that programming language that they exposed to her. She's not going to be writing unit tests. She's not going to be trying to, figure out how to be or meet some security or government requirement. So to me, coding as a tool, there's so many things now, like people program their remote, like I got to make this button be this. Not everything is requiring you to type something into a computer. You encode a lot of things. So I think the distinction is a professional engineer is going to have a different set of tools. They may care about their keyboard, typing speed, their editor, because they're a professional. They want the best gear, maybe help them to do the best job. Whereas if you're a coder, man, it seems like now the things around you in life can be coded or programmed. So you can see now that people in their everyday life are starting to write software for their own tasks. And then when they want to make a career switch to jump into being a professional software developer, it seems to be a nice on-ramp that we didn't have before.
That's awesome, because when you think about it, you still have to have the skills. But if you're never able to take those skills and incorporate those into some type of organized structural system, then your career is either will never take off, or it'll be short-lived at best.
Yeah, so think about that analogy. You have people who are, you go to the basketball court, they killing it. They ain't missing no shots. They dunking from 3-point line. It's like, I ain't never seen nobody dunk from the 3-point line. And then you ask them a question like, why you ain't in the NBA? And for some of those people, not all, but some of those people will tell you like they can't play in a team. They can't play team ball. They can't follow the structure. They can't do the regiment. They don't want to learn the playbook. They consider themselves like they like the blacktop, right? They just want to go hoop, a little bit of structure. Ain't nobody calling no fouls. Ain't nobody shooting free throws. That's a whole different thing. So I think a lot of times it's not about just raw skill set, because I think another thing I want to share with the people who are kind of curious about learning how to write software, get into this development business. In the beginning of your career, it's almost like you can't stop typing. Once you discover this new skill set, you're going to run and write code for everything. And then maybe later on in your career, maybe even much later in your career, you're going to realize sometimes the best thing to do is to write no code at all. If you can solve a problem without reaching for a keyboard, sometimes that takes a little bit more experience to say, you know what, we don't need to write any software for that. Maybe what we need to do in this case is just maybe change the process or just remove the need for that feature to exist in the first place. And then you save yourself writing the software, because software ain't free. It has to be maintained, right? You have to update it. It has bugs. So a lot of times you're gonna grow and mature to the point where you don't always have to build something from scratch or make something new. Sometimes that tool already exists, and your experience will help you build up that catalog of reusable components where you can put your keyboard down and just reach for something that you just kind of integrate to what you already have. And that's a skill that pay attention to as you're learning to code. Be excited, keep that energy going, but understand that the end of the game isn't writing software all the time. It's just a tool. So learn how to use the tool, and you're gonna really get there when you learn when not to use it.
That's perfect, because when you think about it, imagine. Let me stretch this metaphor about basketball just a little further, and as it applies to the topic we're talking about. You have an individual who can do all of the individual things. They can dribble well, they can pass great, they can shoot, do layups, dunk, and all of that stuff. There was an individual in the mid 80s who could do all of that stuff. Didn't win very much initially, but this individual got in a system called the triangle offense. And before you know it, this individual with these insane skills, probably the best that ever did it. And now there's 6 NBA championships. Okay, we're talking about Michael Jordan. When you take these skills, these individual skills, and you put them in a system, now you get great results. So you are a hot shot coder individually, but when you can learn to take those skills that you have and put those into an organized system that may exist in a corporation, now you can flourish because now you understand things like I need to have unit testing. I can't just write this. I need to understand the security and the compliance requirements around what I'm building. I'm not just trying to make it work, but I'm trying to make it work well, make it work optimally, and make it work in the modern day construct, make it work securely, depending on what you're building and who you're building for. All of that is important.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when you're new, someone says, "Hey, I want you to go build this thing," and you just build it. That sometimes you want to understand why. Why are we building this? Who is it for? Because a lot of times it's hard to really express all the requirements because we don't, frankly, know them, right? When you're building a house, I need a house about this size. We've been building houses for thousands of years, probably, right? So that process is fairly mature. Software isn't
Mm-hmm.
quite like that, right? Even the people who've been doing it for a little while, it's hard to really tell you all the things to expect from a security standpoint, what the users need, people with disabilities. It's hard to predict how your software is going to be used. So, as someone curious about programming, understand the requirements, right? Like how many people will be using this software? Are people's lives going to depend on this software? Because if their lives are going to be depending on this software, like maybe flying a plane, then you want to have some quality control in place versus just, coding something, barely getting it to work and saying it's ready. So I think another skill we got to make sure we develop is that listening skill. And then paying
Mm-hmm.
attention, being observant, and then trying to ask the questions that no one is asking. And if you do that, I definitely think that will contribute to your journey as a software engineer. So whether you're learning a new programming language, why is this language this way? Why does it look like this? And sometimes you can go find the history behind those decisions. So sometimes those decisions are made for performance. Sometimes those decisions are made for portability. So it runs on your Mac, it runs on Linux, and it runs on Windows. All of those things have to be understood. So you say, now I know why I'm going through this extra hoop because I get all of this value. Don't miss that opportunity to go a little bit deeper by asking the questions that people don't seem to be asking.
But Kelsey, I don't know how to write. I can't build an operating system. I can't write. I didn't go to MIT. I didn't go to Harvard or Stanford or Berkeley. I can't do this. I can't write any software. I don't want to write a I don't want to develop that kind of software, but I am interested in this stuff called infrastructure. Is there a place for me in that world?
Yeah, what's beautiful is that I think there's an area to contribute for all mindsets. When you think about, let's think about music. Music was a time where classically trained individuals that knew how to play instruments were the people who make music. People who can write and
Mm-hmm.
read music. You probably had a very small pool of people. I would say that's probably towards the middle of humanity because before that, people just, maybe bang on something and you develop music without understanding the structure of it all. But there's a world where some people just pick up a sample. And sometimes it's like the DJ, right? It's like you didn't make no disco records,
Oh
right?
man,
The
okay.
DJ's like, I don't know how to play no piano. I don't know how to play no keyboards. I don't know how to play, a saxophone. But I can take this record from the people who do. Throw it on my turntable and I'll slow it down a bit and I'll catch that bass drum. And then now all of a sudden the DJ has just created the first hip hop track. And they don't know how to necessarily write music from scratch, but they know how it's supposed to sound. And the infrastructure of music, the turntable, the DJs, how fast that record spin, the person that manages that in the musical world, that's the DJ, then later on becomes a producer. And we have all these tools now that say, look, you don't really have to buy a keyboard or a guitar. We already got that in the computer. You just tell us what you want it to sound like. Maybe you just kind of punch in the melody and we'll quantize it and do everything like that. In the other world, software doesn't run in outer space by itself. Software
Mm-hmm.
runs on top of hardware, right? So we say software, then you have hardware. And hardware is going to be what we classically call the computer. Hardware can also be your lights, right? There's software that runs in your lights. Hardware can even be your car. Someone also has to manage that hardware. That hardware, in many cases, is just as or more important than the software. If you think about it, if the hardware goes down, it doesn't matter what the software is doing because it can't run anywhere. So another path into this tech world is to understand that infrastructure. Some would argue a good developer will also learn a little bit about infrastructure to know a little bit about the environment in which their software is running because it could help them troubleshoot or debug or take advantage of that software. So another path for me, when I started out, my I have a long story about in the middle. I had a computer store and there was a lot of business stuff and entrepreneurial stuff. But let's just jump into like going into like my first like job. And one of my first
Yeah.
jobs was like on the phone doing tech support, right? You would get a phone call, you sit in a message queue with everybody else, and you pick up the phone and someone says, "Hey, something's wrong with my server." I used to work in a web hosting industry. People would pay us monthly to run a server so they can run their website or their e-commerce site. And if something would
Hmm.
happen, we would get a call and we would go into their systems and try to fix it. "Hey, my email isn't sending anymore. Could you go take a look?" And that was infrastructure. And it was a good place for me to start because I didn't know how to write software at that time to this level. And I think lots of people think there's only one front door into what we do, but the paths are many. So, maybe be humble, jump in, but nothing's stopping you from learning how to code on the side or on your own time because there is no gate in front of you educating yourself.
And that's the point I was really wanting to get to is that as a software engineer, a software developer, a coder, or many of the other euphemisms for that same type of profession, there are many gates, there are many paths, there are many things that one can do. We're living in a world right now to where all of these systems and these servers that used to live in someone's data center, someone's wiring closet, that we used to have to take time to actually build and configure and patch by hand. You can do that now with code. It's called infrastructure as code. So you're doing a lot of that stuff now with the way we virtualized all of those hundreds of servers into maybe a few big beefy servers. That virtualization has given way to containers. And you actually wrote a book called Kubernetes the Hard Way. I want to make sure that we come back and we touch on Kubernetes the hard way, but the, there are many paths into this world as a coder, as a developer, as a programmer, and whatever you're interested in, you can find a way to do it and make a crazy living doing this stuff that
I
we
also
do.
also want to jump into another thing here too. It's I don't know if the goal is for everyone to try to become a software engineer that is learning how to code. I'll give you a good example. My wife works in the district office for a public school district here where I live, and when she used to work in a classroom or in a building as an associate principal, you can think back to your days in middle school, right? Like you get straight A's or you get close to it, you get a nice certificate with your name on it and your GPA. And think about it. Most people in that profession typically do that by hand. They get all the students on the spreadsheet and they type into all of these certificates and then send them to a printer to be printed. Now, what I did, I saw
Hmm.
her doing this. Like, what are you doing? You're about to do this 400 times? No, 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 no. This is going. How long do you spend on this? A week? Mm-mm. Here's what we're going to do. And then what I ended up doing was taking her spreadsheet because it came out of her, the student management database. And then what you can do is I just step through each row in that spreadsheet and I just automated the PDF curation for the awards. And ran the command in about 30 seconds. Of course, it took me a little time to write the code, but in 30 seconds, we generated all of the awards for all the kids. So now they can just run this little command line. So now think about a lawyer, a doctor, an educator, a teacher. It doesn't matter what profession you're in. You can leverage a lot of the skills that we're talking about. So, for example, if you're let's say you're a fire department chief or you are a fire person and you want to decide where should we build the next fire station? Well, if you have enough data about where fires typically occur, you can query
Hmm.
that data to say, "Hey, I think our next fire station should be in this location because the data that we've been collecting about previous fires and how some of the new homes are being built." You can start to write software as a fire person. Why? Because as a fire person, you know how fires actually work. You know what materials are likely to catch fire. You are an expert in one domain. And this is where we get back to programming is just a tool. So it's really nice when you have experts in another domain pick up this tool to make them even better at their own domain versus switching from being a fire person to a software developer. So a lot of people think you have to make a hard transition to get value. No, think about being the only fire person who can code. Wouldn't that be amazing? Everybody else is like writing things down on spreadsheets and doing things with paper, and then here you come and say, hey, I've automated that. Check out this software.
Yeah, bam, and here it is. And you just, and that is the ultimate mic drop. You do that, that is the ultimate mic drop. And when you do that, you become the go-to person. You become the go-to person. Some years ago, I worked as a consultant, as I mentioned, and this was my first experience with Terraform and the like. We were doing infrastructure as code as a consultant prior to Google. And the thing that struck me, Kelsey, is that whenever we went to the projects, the people who were given the most attention were the people who actually understood how to build the code to create the infrastructure. Here I am, I'm the security guy. I need to make sure that it's secure, but I was kind of pushed off to the corner, and the guy who was center stage, and I think that I want to be heard as well. But in order for me to be heard, guess what I had to do? I had to learn what those cats knew. I had to learn how to take that and do this thing that we call shift left with security. I had to learn how to write code to build the security groups and the firewall rules and the NACLs and all of these things that we needed from a security standpoint in this code so that it was there. Because that person who was actually building the code for the infrastructure, they didn't know security the way I did. But guess what? I didn't know infrastructure coding the way they did.
And let's break down for people what we're talking about here. So a lot of people may be new to this. So I want to give you an analogy. So think about like our society, right? In our society, we say, you shouldn't kill anyone. Now, if that was just something we said by word of mouth, like, hey, you shouldn't kill anyone, then if someone hasn't heard about it before or they don't know why it's bad, we're relying on tribal knowledge to make that a thing. So what we do is we try to codify our values into laws, right? So the law would be, you're not allowed to kill anyone. Well, maybe there's a few exceptions, but we're going to be real clear about what those are. And here's what happens if you do. And it's written down in a way that you can read it and say, oh, it's not for people to try to guess if they did or the wrong or right thing, but we've codified it so that way people have something to live by. Now let's switch that to the software world. If I tell you to set up 1,000 servers and I hire 1,000 people to do it, now each one of them might set up that server in a slightly different way. And this is where humans are actually pretty terrible at this. Out of those 1,000, 5 of them might be the same. And then I got to hire someone to go check them all. And then we have to go back and fix them. And to be honest, that's the state of the world right now, where most people have been doing or making a mess of this stuff for 20, 30 years. And a lot of our profession is literally going in trying to fix that stuff. That's another story. Mm-hmm. But the reason why we want automation is that what we do now is we say, let's get one of those servers to be the way we want it to be. And then as a team, right? Maybe I don't need 1,000 people, may only need 10 people with different expertise. Let's bring those 10 people together, the security people, the networking people, all the people, bring them together and say, what should it look like? And then we may write it down on paper or whatever, and then we want to turn that into code, right? The code is the thing where we tell the computer, I want you to make this server look like this. And maybe we do it one time, and if it looks good, then we kind of have that recipe to go make it look good for 1,000 of them repeatedly. And this is where we start to serialize all of our learning, all of our knowledge, all of our collaboration as a team. So without coding as that tool, even if 10 of us figure this thing out and we hand out the instructions to 1,000 different people, there's a chance they're going to miss a step. Or when we need to change it, there's going to be people who have memorized the thing we wrote down last week, but they don't get the update. So they still doing it the old way. And we want them to make a change, and then we got to go train 1,000 people again. Code allows us to say, hey, we've captured what needs to happen, and then we can enforce it in an automatic way.
And so look at what happens. You're that person. You're the person who understands this. You understand all of the ins and outs of how that one server should be perfectly built. I know how to make the recipe for a perfectly built server end to end. Now, if you can learn to code that recipe, those best practices and everything that goes into making that server perfect, your skills have now become transferable because you're no longer stuck in the old rudimentary way of doing it, and now you're essentially future proofing yourself.
Or what we
What
used
we're
to say back in the day was you should automate yourself out of the job. So if you come into work every day and you're building servers by hand and you're really good, you went from doing 5 when you started to 50 in a day, and you might feel real good about yourself. But the truth is, you're one person away from who understands this to come in and see what you're doing and say, yo, I could write a command and do 1 million per day. What you want to do is be the person who comes up with that idea because you learned this way of working. And here's the thing, a lot of people have traditionally been scared about automating their job because they say I'm going to automate myself out of a job. But one thing I've learned, every time I automated myself out of a job, there's going to be a better one after that because you now can do more complex
Wow.
things than things that can be easily automated away.
Wow, that's a very important point because people are afraid of innovation anyway. People are afraid. I don't think they're necessarily afraid of innovation as much as they are afraid of change. And I think the fear is that if I innovate too much and if I automate too much and if I show too much, then I become less of a need. There's less of a need for me if I could just write some code to do it. But guess what? There are 1,000 other companies out there that's not at the level of maturity at this company that you just introduced as innovation. And if you can start to teach others how to innovate, there's this whole lecture circuit that Kelsey is a rock star on, that he does all this stuff and he records himself on YouTube, all this cool stuff. Don't be afraid to innovate. Don't be afraid to tinker.
Also, think about, I'm from the South, so when we go visit the South, there's every family member got some recipe that they ain't gonna let you have, right? Because they're trying to say, no, if you want that, you got to come see me. So they hold this carrot over, like, you want some of the sweet potato pie, you got to come over and I'll make it for you. So that's one way to look at it, and yeah, there is some value in that. But there's also this other thing, like if you want sweet potato pie anywhere in the United States, Patti LaBelle got you covered. Right? That Patti LaBelle, sweet potato pies in all the grocery stores, because she's taken that recipe and she's automated it. Now, everybody that may have never met Patti Bell or never will, they can go get one of her sweet potato pies. And you got to ask yourself sometimes, what is your goal? If your goal is to, let everyone in the world taste your particular thing, then you may have to, there's no way you're going to be able to do it by yourself. And I think there's a lot of times we got to remind ourselves, what is the actual job? You are not a Python developer. You're not a Linux administrator. You just happen to be a person first who has a job in the technology field, and the current problem in front of you might be something that can be solved with Python or might be something that can be solved with Linux. But the goal is to move to a situation where you've knocked that problem out, and I want a bigger and more challenging problem. Give me something that I don't know how to do. And if you keep stepping up with that, there's no way you can't be relevant or be the person people look to for what do we do next.
I touched on this a little earlier about observing Kelsey at speaking at some big events. So earlier this year, we were at one of our customers' big event, had a huge cloud summit. A lot of big executives were there. Executives were on stage doing the thing that they do. They're in their business attire and they're doing their thing. But one of the most anticipated talks and the most well-received talks was not when all of the big executives gave theirs, because they do the thing that they do, and it's a place for that. But Kelsey got on stage The brother had on some jeans, and the jeans were the jeans and some sneakers and a t-shirt, and the complete antithesis aesthetically of what these executives were. But the knowledge that he dropped, I think you had 2 slides in your deck. Maybe I may be giving you an extra slide, but everybody was like, that was the impression. How do you do that? What is your thought process that goes into you doing what you do? Because I think you might only had 2 slides.
I had no slides, so that's cool. But slides or no slides, I guess, is not really the point. But there was some point in my career when I realized it's okay to be myself. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay to dress how I dress. It's okay to use my own vernacular. It's okay to say dope. It's okay to be who I am. And that takes a while for a lot of people. So no way, no shape, and I'm telling you just go do that tomorrow if that's not where you're comfortable. But once I figured out how to be me, then I started to be able to relax. I can go in front of 20,000 people and relax a little bit. I can look at those individuals in the audience and just speak to them as if we stand in face to face. And again, I realized that I'm a human being first that has my own views on things. I'm not necessarily trying to tell you the right way. I'm just trying to tell you things of my experience, right? This piece of technology, here's how I seen it work. And that's when you're natural in that way, that's where the jokes come out. That's when the personality comes out. And then that's when you
Mm-hmm.
get people that were sitting up tight to lean in and relax too. And then you can take them with you. You can tell stories that are organic. I'm not telling you to buy this piece of software because I work at this company. I'm showing you how this software is going to make you a better person and in turn have a better business or whatever you want out of life. And once that's the essence that you come from, then your presentation is going to reflect that style. You're putting people first. And I think that's the thing where a lot of times we don't know who to be because it seems like everyone wants us to be somebody else. You should be like this other person. You should be like that other person. Or maybe you do it to yourself. Hey, I respect this other person, so let me pattern myself after that. And there's nothing wrong with starting that and studying how other people move. But don't rob the
Mm-hmm.
world of who you are and what spin you want to
Oh,
give on it, right? Like there's a thing where I've seen people say, well, Kels, I don't want to do a talk about that because you've already covered that subject. Ain't about the fact that I covered the subject. It's the fact that other people want to hear a different point of view. So when you cover it, let me turn this light down some. When you cover it, just be careful. Let me see here. Okay. When you
yeah,
cover
that's
it,
good.
yeah,
That's
when you
good.
cover the topic, just be sure to bring your point of view. If you just copy everything else everybody is talking about, of course no one's going to be interested in that. But when you say, hey, this is where I'm coming from, here's my background, and here's my lens on it, now people remember you. Now they remember you were the person talking about the thing versus the thing, and then you happen to be talking about it.
Be yourself because everyone else is already taken.
There you go.
And so that's it's just super simple. Super simple, like my man G. Garvin says, it's super simple. Be yourself because everyone else is already taken. And that's kind of my approach. Whenever I'm talking, I'm a pastor, so I'm always in front of people, and it's just natural for me. I saw it from my dad, but I can't mimic my dad's style because I can't sing like my dad used to sing. I can't do some of the things, but I'm me. I'm Elliot. I'm the ABE. I'm Pastor ABE, and some people like it, some people don't. But guess what? I got to be me because I'm authentically and positively me. I don't have to wonder who I need to be in this situation because I'm always me. I'm always authentic, and I'm always bringing forth the genuineness and my perspective to this situation, where whatever it is. And
And
I saw you do that, and that's how you will receive in that same way.
And I would also, it took me a while to get there, but sometimes you also have to question who you are and give yourself an opportunity to grow and be patient a little bit. I think a lot of times, if you sometimes you have to step back and question who are you and why. Sometimes who you are because of your current situation, and maybe that's not who you want to reflect because you see yourself being more than that. So I think that like as much time as people spend on learning how to code, I think you should spend an equal amount of time just learning who you are, right? A lot of times we get advertisements or we'll see a certain thing, and the things that are in front of us is sometimes will shape how we think, how we act, and how we live. And sometimes you got to go revisit some of that stuff. So, if you, there are some people who don't need to just be who they are. They need some work. And if that's you, then take the time to do that, because it's not just about showing up as a software engineer. When I used to hire people, I knew that I was also hiring the person. What is this person going to bring to the team? What experience does this person have? And sometimes I just want to hire the person because their experience is just drastically different than everybody else on the team. And I'm going to welcome that new perspective. Or sometimes I'll get a person that says, look, I haven't had a lot of jobs in this space yet. And I said, so, okay, what are you doing? Man, I'm on this book right now. I got my certifications. I'm out here grinding. I'm watching the meetups. I'm on my YouTube. I'm going to make it regardless. I'm just here putting myself, that's the person that I'm going to take a chance on, because I know they're going to push me, right? When I see
They got that
pushing,
doll. Yeah.
they come and they asking questions, and they asking questions after they tried on their own. Like, that energy you got to bring to the table. So this is why I encourage people, also work on where you are mentally. Make sure that you're in the right place. Make sure that you're not being distracted by those things. But I'm telling you, when the real person comes out, that's going to be something you're going to be comfortable with, and it's going to be sustainable.
One of the things that I want to touch on also is that there are certain, in the space that we work in, there are certain hard skills that you have to have. There are certain, you have to understand certain technological things that are hard skills. But then there are also soft skills that's going to allow you to go even further. If you never take the time to develop that person within through soft skills development, you may never be given an opportunity to show the real you.
And if you don't mind, let me add a layer on top of that. Because
go ahead and do that.
In the industry, a lot of people will say there are hard and soft skills. And some people will classify a hard skill as learning to type, learning to program, learning about different operating systems. And then they will classify hard skills like empathy, learning to write.
Soft skills, yeah.
And to me, the soft skills are actually the hardest ones to pull off. Being an effective communicator is so hard that most people won't even try. They'll hide behind the hard skills because the soft skills are too hard. So I think when people think about hard versus soft, they think maybe hard is more challenging to develop, because I'm of the opinion that most people can learn to program without a doubt. Because a lot of times, I'll be honest with you all, I'm about 20 years into this and I'm still Googling how to do some basic stuff that I should have remembered. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's just the nature of it. Because things that we can look up and we know to find, we typically cast them out of our memory space to make room for more important things. But this soft skills is being able to say, we shouldn't write that code at all and save the company $10 million because there's something that already exists. That's a soft skill. Or being able to look at it and say, look, if we write the software in this way, it's going to be biased towards a group of people. And then what we're going to do is unfairly write our algorithm in a way that underserves people. That's a hard thing to pull off, because you have to be aware of how the world works. You have to have some empathy for real life. So if you try to hide behind the wall of hard skills, you're going to lack the necessary things to do the actual hard things in life, which is speak up when you need to speak up. Put the keyboard down when it's not needed. So I would encourage people in their brains to flip that around. A lot of times, the more seasoned, the more experienced, when you move up in the world, you don't write code anymore because you're too busy doing things that you can't do with the keyboard. Those are really hard things. So I think maybe we can use that word to classify these two sets of skills, but trust me, the soft skills are typically way more challenging and difficult to get right than the hard skills, because the hard skills are in many ways well-defined. If I type this into the computer, typically this is what I get back. If I say something
it's
to
more binary. Yeah,
it's pretty. I mean, it's like it goes down to binary at some point. But when you're talking to a human and when you're dealing with humans, it's way more complex than any computer ever would be.
I think one of the thing that was the catalyst, and then we'll wrap up. But one of the things that helped me the most in my career, one of my early mentors told me this. Elliot, if you ever want to know, if you really want to, are you interested in improving yourself? You want to know who you are. You need to ask someone who you respect, how do you see me?
Hmm.
And so I went to a director who was not in my direct chain, and I asked the question, how do you see me? This person gave me their first. They clarified, are you sure you want this answer? I said, I think so. But he proceeded to tell me that I see you as argumentative, combative, abrasive, aggressive. Went down the line. I said, okay, great, thank you. Now, what can I do, in your opinion, to improve in these areas? He said, Elliot, thank you so much for asking. We offer this. You can do this. Take managing interpersonal relationships. Go to the Dale Carnegie Leadership Institute. The company will pay for that. All of these different things to understand interpersonal relationships and behaviors, things that I needed at that time to make me to be more introspective. And that feedback that I got almost 20 years ago has catapulted me to where I am today. I am nowhere near the teammate that I am, the leader that I am today as I was back then, because I was willing to take constructive feedback and make some fundamental changes about it as it pertains to soft skills, not what firewall or router or Cisco, none of that stuff. What can I do to make Elliot better? And that's the one thing that helped me to become better. So I'll flip that question to you. What's some of the best advice you've received in your career that has been most instrumental to helping you to become who you are?
I mean, there's a lot of it. I think one that I just, kind of mid-career, someone was like, don't be afraid of your own power. And it takes a lot to understand what that means, because a lot of times we're always looking for someone else to exercise their power on our behalf, right? If you would just let me, if you can just, and at that point, sometimes we do it out of fear because we're very afraid of, what if you did it yourself? What if you figured out what it took to do it yourself and then you did it? And that can be very afraid. I mean, that can make someone very afraid, because once you have that power and that responsibility, then there are no more excuses. And when I started to look at this world from that point of view, right? Steve Jobs had this thing of, right, like, the world can be changed. And once you understand that, then you can go out and change it. And I think a lot of times for us, we have to understand that we do hold some amount of power in our daily lives. We have the power to help someone else. We have the power to help ourselves. So then, and I was already on that path, but just hearing it phrased that way, because they watched me do something, like the team was not on board with something. Everyone was talking about how hard it was going to be. We've tried it already, wasn't going to work. And I was just like, let me take a shot at it. Not that I'm better than anyone, but just let me take a shot at it. And I got it to work. And it actually became one of Puppet Labs' core products, the Puppet Forge, came out of that work. And it I remember we were at an engineering meeting and I kind of presented it, and people was like, I don't know if we need to merge these things. And there's a lot of kind of disgruntledness. And the CEO at the time, the founder of Puppet, Luke Kanice, right there in the front row, I remember he defended the effort. He was like, this is a good direction. He made it work, and we're going to put a team behind it to make it go forward. But the UX director at the time was Randall. And when I got off the podium, I probably had the facial expression like I didn't expect that response from the team. And I remember he pulled me to the side and says, that was fucking awesome. Sorry for cussing. He said,
So you were feeling dejected because of the team, but you got validated by the dude.
Yeah. He was just like, don't worry about that. Don't be afraid of your own power. And I was like, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. You can't be afraid, because you can actually move the world in a direction you want it to go in, but you're going to have to ramp up to do it. So that was a big game changer for me. I do love working with other people. I do appreciate the help of other people, but I don't necessarily expect it. I expect that it's on me to skill up, do the hard work, so I can have that bit of power to use on my own.
Let me tell you, if you don't know your value, and I do a lot of mentoring, and I often come around to this point. If you don't know your value and you don't know your worth, somebody else does. If someone sees value in you that you don't see in yourself, they will use it for their own benefit, often to your detriment. So if you don't know your value, you don't know your worth, then basically you're pimping out your gift for pennies. You're jumping over dollars to pick up dimes because you don't know your worth. You don't know your true value. But somebody else sees that in you, and they will always use it for their benefit, usually to your detriment. So I encourage everybody, understand you are valuable. You were created on purpose, with purpose in mind. Know your value, and don't be afraid of your power. Kelsey Hightower said it. And if it's a lie, he told it. If it's a lie, you told it. But coding is cool. Now, one last thing I want to drop on you, Kelsey, because I know we're both some hip hop heads, and even though Kelsey builds software, Kelsey is a hip hop head. Kelsey, can you name this beat?
I can't hear it.
Oh my goodness, you got to be able to hear it. Oh my goodness, hold on, let me go back. I want you to be able to hear this. Hold on, let me go back here and make sure that I got share computer sound. There we go. I got to share my computer sound because I want you to hear this, and I want you to tell me. More brothers who think they can. Hip hop heads know that. Come on now.
So it's Rakim for sure. And
Yeah.
let me see. It's not Check Out My Melody.
It is.
Okay, check out my melody.
The reason why I teased that was
Okay.
because you teased earlier about samples, and I love the way you got into the whole stream of consciousness, talking about melodies and artistry and music and all that stuff. That's all that we're talking about here when we're talking about software development, software engineering, building software. You need to be able to create your own melody. Create your own lane in this space. Kelsey has done this to great effect. Kelsey, if you could take 2 or 3 minutes to tell us about this book. I want people to buy this book, Kubernetes the Hard Way, and then we'll wrap up with some words of wisdom from Kelsey.
So Kubernetes the Hard Way is some documentation that's actually free. The book is called Kubernetes Up and Running, which is the first tech book I did with 2 co-authors, Brendan Burns and Joe Beta. The other 2 are some of the co-founders of Kubernetes. That book is basically talking about all this containers, cloud native Kubernetes thing. And that's a book from O'Reilly. You can go get it. It has a nice dolphin on the front. You buy it and put a little money in my pocket. No problem with that.
What was the genesis of that book? What was the motivation for you guys to actually write that book?
So I started the book probably a year before I invited those 2 co-authors to finish it up. But the whole point of that book was I just thought that all of these ideas, the way I like to explain things, very example driven, just needed to live in book form. So I did the outline. I probably got about, 50, 60% of the way there. And I was like, you know what? I need some help. Number 1, writing a book is hard. But 2, having those 2 co-authors that look at Kubernetes from a different lens, I think as a team really created something special. And it was right on time because I think that was one of the first books for the whole Kubernetes community. And even 4 years later, it's still a very popular book. So it was a nice collaboration with many viewpoints in a single thing that you can put in your hand.
Do you have any new book projects that you're working on, or anything that you're working on right now?
Yeah, right now. So I think one day I'm going to publish some things around some of the networking and security stuff in this space. So I like to put stuff on GitHub first. So you'll probably see it in a couple of weeks. It's basically how to build a service mesh, pretty advanced topic, but I love teaching people how to build things from the ground up so they have that knowledge.
Yeah, you've been doing a lot of talk about that on Twitter.
Yeah, I just think it's so important as people who are practitioners and to learn these things at that level. It gives you a lot of power in what you can do with it because not everyone in the world will learn it, but those who do can carve out a special place for themselves. So my goal there is, number 1, I'm learning some things I didn't know before, going super deep. The community is great. So I'm reaching out to the people who created some of these projects that I'm documenting, and they break things down, and I can kind of spit it back to them and say, hey, here's how I understand it. Here's how I explain it. And then maybe we'll find a few issues that we can improve. So again, this is me learning in public. I'll do it end to end. I'll spend a couple of weeks getting it as perfect as I can get it. Then I'll share with other people, hopefully to save them that time so they can be experts at it.
Awesome, Kelsey. From being a shift manager at 15 at McDonald's to where you are now, you have definitely upskilled and changed the game in some amazing ways. You've shown a lot of people, and you showed me that it doesn't take an Armani suit to stand on stage in front of 5,000 people. It helps, but it doesn't take all that in order to be an awesome presenter. Be yourself. Don't be afraid of your own power. But for those who are listening today that really want to get into this space, are there any books or trainings or what kind of direction should that high school kid who really wants to get into building software, or that college kid who's looking for direction, what are some practical things that they should be focusing on now in order to progress along this path?
Yeah, I would say early in your career, you have your whole life to work. There's no need to rush into that. And don't miss out on the opportunity to just experiment. Just play around with some stuff. You don't have to use the best stuff. You don't have to use the right stuff. Make something bad. Make something terrible. Make something that isn't great. Make something that doesn't work. Don't miss that opportunity to play. So when you look at all this technology, I remember the first book I bought was probably $30 at Barnes & Noble. We had bookstores back then. And I remember I just bought one book on I think Linux was was FreeBSD. And I got that one book and I read it probably 10 times. I just wanted to understand. The first read didn't make a lot of sense. I didn't know why they were saying what they were saying. You go online, you try to piece it together. They got little examples you can follow with your hands. But I just started playing around, asking questions, trying things, failing, experimenting. And I was on my own timeline. And then at that age, you are also still somewhat on your own timeline. Give yourself space. And the thing is, you're better off just spending 1 hour a day consistently learning and getting better than trying to cram it into I'm going to be an expert in 6 months. Because guess what? Even after that time of sitting on my mom's floor with this book open, it's still the same process today, right? Almost 20 years later, I'm still on my floor, flipping through books, learning stuff, looking online, trying to push myself. And you know what? One thing I do, I still leave a little room to play.
You have to do that. I remember the first book that I bought was it was an MS-DOS, maybe 6.1, when there was the new mem maker, but I wanted to learn I didn't want to run mem maker. I wanted to learn how to configure the memory in an this is way back, folks, way before a lot of y'all's time. But my oldest son was 6 months old. I had him on a lap with his bottle in one hand, and I had the book in the other hand. This was 1993, and I'm reading my computer book, and that's how I got started. Folks, you have to devote your time to study, because the curious become the learners. The curious will become the learners. If you're curious enough about it, maybe, just maybe, you will become passionate about it, and then you will never really feel like you're working. We get to do really cool stuff. I mean, I see Kelsey at all the cool spots. Kelsey is the cool kid on the block, and I'm trying.
Hey,
but
well,
if you
I want y'all to come join me. You know what I mean? I think this is one of these career paths where, from so far what I've seen and the people around me, you get back what you put in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do. I like to say time ain't nothing but time. What you get out of it is what you put into it. If you do the hard work now, if you put in the hard work, you're gonna get something out of it later. Do what you need to do now, so you can do whatever you want to do later. I'm gonna say that one more time. Do what you need to do now, so you can do whatever you want to do later. And that is where you put in the hard work. But Kelsey, I want to thank you for taking, I've taken up way too much of your time today, but I want to thank you for enlightening us and really sharing and demystifying this whole concept of coding and developing and software engineering and software development. This is something that a lot of people are interested in, but they may have a perception that it is a different way. I think you've shown us that it may not be what you think, but then in some instances it is. You just got to get into it and play around, and don't be afraid to fail. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, and I would probably end with one more thing. It's like, why do we do this stuff? Some people are motivated by the money, the allure of being in this field, and it can be very fruitful for a lot of things. Growing up my life, a lot of people they always wanted that Rolex, that gold watch, the expensive watch. And I realized when I got to the peak of my career where buying those things would no longer be challenging, I never bought those things. And I realized that I didn't do this for the fancy watch. I'm doing this so I would never have to wear one.
Whoa. Oh my goodness. I am going to have, when this video goes up, I'm going to have that quote crawling on the screen. I didn't do it for the fancy watch, but I did it because so that I wouldn't have to have one. That's the mic drop moment. That is the mic drop moment. With that, we have to end it right there. Kelsey Hightower, thank you so much. He does it so he does not even have to have a watch. That means if you don't have to have a watch, folks, that means you're the boss. That is what that means to me. Next week, we're gonna continue on with coding, how coding is cool. We're gonna talk to some folks in the offensive security space that's gonna tell us about how you can use coding. You can use code to actually do some things, man. You can do some things with code. And so I'm going to talk to some offensive security professionals next week. And that's going to be a really, really fun talk about how you can use code to uncover the flaws in I'll say this cleverly, how you can uncover flaws in software that some people may use for good or some people may use for bad. But that's what we're going to talk about on next week's show. And until next time, this is Pastor ABE saying, according to your faith, it will be unto you. Be blessed.